Greetings of solidarity from Gwangju, South Korea. My name is Anselmo Lee. I'm the moderator of this session, advisor to May 18 Foundation. This session is about global democracy, in particularly 3 proposals to democratic UN. So this is not the abstract one. We are going to discuss very concrete proposals that we can do together to build a global democracy. This is one of the over 20 parallel sessions during Gwangju Democracy Forum for 5 days. As you may know, Gwangju Democracy Forum is an annual forum to commemorate Gwangju People's Uprising 1980. So this is the 41st anniversary of this People's Uprising. It was an official ceremony 2 days ago, and national president, prime minister, the many politicians, they come together to remember the history of democracy movement, particularly in 1980. I'm wearing this green, the scarf, from the cemetery. It's written, the history not remember will repeat itself. So to stress the importance of remembrance and also justice to fight against impunity. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Andreas. Could you please introduce briefly about the background of this presentation, and then we can go into the presentation. Andrea, you have a floor, please.
Thank you, Anselmo, for the introduction and your opening words. First, I wish to thank the May 18 Memorial Foundation for including this event in the program of the Gwangju Democracy Forum. And I also wish to thank all the partner organizations for joining us as co-hosts who are present just now. The session will discuss those 3 proposals for more democratic UN that are recommended in the International Civil Society Statement for Inclusive Global Governance that was launched last month. You can find this statement online at wethepeoples.org, and it calls on the UN and UN member states to establish a UN World Citizens Initiative, a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, and the Office of a UN Civil Society Envoy. The statement was initiated by Civicus, Democracy International, and Democracy Without Borders, and by now it has been endorsed by a diverse group of more than 150 organizations and networks from across the globe, including the Coalition for the UN We Need, Together First, the Asia Democracy Network, Greenpeace, Open Society Foundations, and many others. Also, if your organization hasn't yet endorsed the statement, please sign up. It is still open for signatures. We have decided to focus on these 3 proposals because we believe that if they are implemented, they can help unleash a transformational momentum at the United Nations. We know democracy and civic space is under pressure in many countries. That has been a subject in many sessions of this overall conference. But we think this is not a reason to retreat. Quite the contrary, we need to demand real steps forward at all levels, and this initiative has its focus on the United Nations. This initiative for a more democratic UN comes at a good moment because it serves as input to a consultation that is currently carried out by the United Nations. In September this year, the UN Secretary General is supposed to present a report on how to advance a so-called common agenda that was included in a high-level declaration of the General Assembly last year, commemorating the UN's 75th anniversary. This common agenda includes points such as building trust, strengthening partnerships, and upgrading the United Nations. So now is the time for the UN and member states to follow up on their lofty rhetoric about making global governance more inclusive and giving we the peoples a voice. Already in 2020, the UN carried out a broad public consultation, and in January this year, they published a final report about this. And before I hand over to my colleague Yasmina, who will tell us more about the UN process, I'd like to highlight that the UN's own report acknowledges that a UN Parliamentary Assembly and a participatory instrument, such as the World Citizens Initiative, were among the proposals most frequently mentioned and supported by citizens in the field of UN renewal. The statement on or for inclusive global governance is a major step forward, in my opinion, in the global advocacy for these proposals, and also, of course, for the UN Civil Society Envoy. The Gwangju Democracy Forum will adopt a final declaration tomorrow, and of course, we hope and suggest that this final declaration will endorse the civil society statement for inclusive global governance and the 3 proposals that it contains. And now I would like to hand over to Yasmina, who will also complement this introduction. And also, Yasmina, great that you are joining us. I know it's 5 o'clock in the morning where you are, so that's really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Thanks very much. Despite the very early hour, I'm very happy to be here representing the Coalition for the UN We Need, also known as C4UN. And I'd also like to thank the May 18th Memorial Foundation for organizing this very important and timely forum. Under the auspices of C4UN, UN 75 People's Declaration and Plan for Action was adopted by global civil society in May of last year. This document supports the 3 proposals on the agenda today. So the coalition, of course, happily endorses this statement for inclusive global governance. The high-level declaration, which Andreas mentioned earlier, identifies 12 key commitment areas across the global agenda, from climate to youth engagement to sustainable financing, among others. Since then, the C4UN, which was formerly known as the UN 2020 campaign, has been focused on follow-up activities related to these 12 commitment areas in the lead up to the SG's report, which will be out later this year. As part of this follow-up, the Secretary General has reached out this year to key stakeholders in order to solicit further inputs for his upcoming report. Moreover, the SG's recent speeches have stressed the need for a more networked and inclusive UN system, a new global deal, and a UN 2.0. Last month saw the launch of the We the People's digital consultation, which started on the 23rd of April and is slated to close at the end of this week. This consultation aims to gather views from civil society activists and experts of all ages and regions across diverse disciplines on how to accelerate the commitments made in the UN 75 political declaration in order to feed into the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. This report will be informed by consultations with member states, thought leaders, and young thinkers, together with the We the People's track, engaging civil society constituencies, parliamentarians, and the private sector. The digital consultation already boasts more than 200 proposals, with more in the works as we approach the deadline. Among these 200 plus proposals are those we will discuss in a moment: the establishment of a UN World Citizens Initiative, a UNPA, and the Office of a UN Civil Society Envoy. Participants are able to view, comment, and vote on these proposals in an effort to crowdsource effective ways in which we can take these proposals forward and advance our common agenda for a more efficient, transparent, and democratic UN. It's quite encouraging to see already that these 3 proposals for a more democratic UN are those that have received the most votes in the consultation so far. While the timeline is short, I'll share in the chat a link with more information on how to engage with the platform. And I'd really encourage you to help boost these proposals with votes and comments if you're able to. Overall, I'd say 2020 was a really great occasion to take stock of this great global institution, celebrate its successes, underscore areas in which it could be upgraded, of course. But if we really want a UN that is truly inclusive and democratic, real change is needed, and soon. You'll now hear more from my colleagues about some concrete proposals that are seeking to do just that. So I'll leave it at that and hand it back over to Anselmo.
Okay, thank you very much, Yasmina. As you know, now you understand more in depth why we organized this session. As you know, we have a 4 concrete presentation, global 1, and then there are 2 discussions from Asia, because these we want to make sure that Asian CSO and politicians, especially the parliamentarians, can join this global campaign. Share with us your idea and proposals. Okay, unmute please. Umeaura.
I believe that people didn't hear you properly. There was a disconnect.
It's okay.
So did you ask me to make a presentation now?
Anselmo, the connection was frozen, so you haven't, we were unable to hear you for a while.
Okay.
But it's true, Takehico, you would be the
Yes,
first
yes.
to present.
Now, yes, please.
Okay,
Yes, please
so
go
thank
ahead.
you.
Okay, sorry.
Can you hear me? Can I start?
I believe you can start, yes.
Okay, okay. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to make a presentation and as other part of the great panel. And I'm very honored to have this occasion. Thank you very much for that. And let me share the slide. Oops, I cannot share. Could you make me a co-host so that I can share my PowerPoint slide?
이 활성화에 됐잖아. 포스트를 해줘야 사람들이 포스트를 봐서. sorry. 모든 사람 포스트를 만들어줘야죠. 아니 모든 사람을 코호스트로 해준다고. 그래야 그렇게 해야지. Sorry, I think there's another technical problem. Is it okay? Can you upload, Professor Umeaura?
Not yet. I cannot make. Okay. Now I think
again,
I can.
Try again.
Can you see this?
Okay, now it's
see this slide? Okay, so let me start my presentations. My presentation is not concrete proposal, but kind of the background of the nature of global democratic deficit today. But I add the words in the face of existential risk of humanity. The scholar called Martin Rees once said, no better than 50-50 that our present civilization on Earth will survive until the end of this century. So the starting point for all of us is we have to think about existential risk to humanity. Is there really existential risk to humanity? Well, I cannot I cannot prove it. No scientific way to prove that humans will fall into an existential risk, say around 2050. However, it is also impossible to prove that such a risk will not be taking place around 2050, for instance. That is why we have to consider that's going to be real, and we need to prevent it by as early as possible. Then, because the problem is global, we have to look at how global governance is functioning. But I would say it is malfunctions. So if you, in terms of theoretical analysis, let me put 3 sectors. government, market, and civil society. And if it's global society, it's global government, global market, and global civil society. But if you look at global market, as you know, a multinational corporation, etc., causing many problems. And it is a role of the government to control those problems, the market failure. However, there's no global government right now. Therefore, global civil society should take a role to control the global market failure and also to supplement global government, conceptually. However, lack of power. Therefore, we see the malfunction of global governance right now. So challenges are, there's a failure of global markets, lack of global government, and global civil society is on the way to be formed. I mean, it's not clearly formed. So a failure of global market with underperforming global civil society with global government, without global government should be addressed. Logically speaking, what to be done is, we should create global or world government, and also global civil society should be empowered. But let's focus on the global government issue. In 2009, the famous scholar Thomas Weiss said, governance supplements government. Therefore, governance becomes meaningful when there is a government. But if you look at the conceptual government right now, there are nearly 200 states and 300 international organizations mixing together, try to govern the world. However, in reality, big states dominate international relations, and also there's no legitimacy to govern the world. And it is important to understand, of course, all of you understand, people are excluded from decision or policy making at the global level. So what is needed is a world government with full democracy, meaning there should be equality among nations, and also there should be participation of people in the world. What is a world government? There are many proposals like this, depending on to what extent each country should give its sovereignty to the world government, etc. What is world government? In a nutshell, I would say purpose is to prevent existential risks to humanity and solving global challenges. 3 components: World Parliament, to discuss policies for human survival, making legally binding decisions. World Government, it is the administration partly beyond the national sovereignty to implement decisions made by the World Parliament. And World Constitution, World Laws, and World Court of Justice, which is the judicial branch legally support World Parliament and World Government. But why the world government? What about the UN? My topic is, as you understand, goes beyond United Nations. United Nations is not above the state, but it's under the state, member states. And UN is the organ to providing information to member states and providing forum conferences with them, and also implementing programs and projects decided by the member states. And the characteristic is not, it is undemocratic. As you know, the existence of P5 and veto power. Therefore, it is time to think about beyond United Nations, in my understanding. Of course, there are critiques against the world government, such as Kant. He said nations should be dissolved by one strong state if there's world government, and laws lose effect as jurisdiction enlarges. It's going to be soulless despotism. And by John Rawls, there are critiques like it's going to be global despotism or rule over a fragile empire torn by frequent civil strife. Therefore, what we need is minimal world government. What does that mean? First of all, it means giving a world government a substantial power over national states on issues on global challenges, including human survival issues only. And also, there is an importance of federalism and subsidiarity principle for respecting and securing identity and autonomy at the local, national, and regional level. And people's participation at the global level is to be realized through a world parliament, and participation of diverse sectors, including environment and youth, etc., should be incorporated there. So by establishing minimal world government, preventing a world government from being global soulless despotism or rule over fragile empire torn by frequent civil strife, and ensuring participation of people. So in conclusion, it's really time to start taking serious about an existential risk to humanities. And global governance at its stance cannot address the existential risk, requiring a democratic world government, especially minimal world government equipped with federalism and subsidiarity. And this should be created, hopefully 2040 at the latest, given the risk is approaching. It is important for the proponent of minimal world government should be capable of answering criticisms, thereby gaining support of a majority of world population as well as of world leaders in time. Therefore, it is very important for the following presentations on UNFPA, UNPA, etc., to make it happen. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Umeura. Especially, it's a big topic, but you present to us very concise manner so we can understand what is the key main message of this project. We are very excited about this project, but as you know, you said 2040, 2050 is a long way to go. But let's discuss further with a very concrete suggestion. The next speaker, Yvonne Suarez, the Member of Parliament from Mozambique, she'll present to us about concrete proposal for UNPA, Parliamentary Assembly. Suarez, you have a floor, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, yes.
Perfect, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to present the proposal of a UN Parliamentary Assembly. First of all, Democracy Without Borders is an international civil society organization with the chapters around the world that promotes democracy from the local to the global level, with the focus on strengthening democratic participation and representation of the citizens in more effective global institutions. Democracy Without Borders coordinates the international campaign for a UN Parliamentary Assembly. The aims of and objectives of a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly are to involve the people of the world in the work of the UN and the system of global governance, as well as in political negotiations and decisions at the global level through elected representatives. To exercise parliamentary oversight functions over the work of the UN and the system of global governance, and to make its activities more transparent and accountable to the public, to establish a common platform for international parliamentary collaboration in the common interest of humanity, and to provide an independent world forum in which potential solutions to global challenges are publicly discussed and recommendations for action are made to the UN and to the governments. Another aim or objective is to promote fundamental human rights, democracy, and the rule of law worldwide, and to contribute to the ongoing development of a planetary ethos that places the welfare of people and life on health at the center, to serve as a catalyst for global democratization, integration, and reform. As you know, humanity faces a multitude of global challenges, above all the need to create a sustainable, just, and peaceful global civilization that respects planetary boundaries and preserves life on Earth. If global institutions and the political process are strengthening and renewed, their legitimacy will come from the people whom empowers them to work together for the global common good and future generations. This requires implementing democratic representation and participation at the global level. To initiate this democratization and strengthening of global governance, we suggest the creation of a UN Parliamentary Assembly. The Assembly can be designated along the lines of existing international parliamentary institutions and at the outset be established by the UN General Assembly as complementary body without the need of amend the UN Charter. The powers and functions of the Assembly should be explained or expanded gradually with the long-term objective of developing a world parliament whose members are elected directly by the global population. Initially, representatives should be selected by political groups in existing parliaments whereby the opposition is to be represented. It is recommended that the Assembly is open to universal participation and that the allocation of seats per country should initially follow the principle of digressive proportionality. The work is to be based on transnational political groups formed by individual representatives. The Assembly, political groups, and individual representatives need to be committed to the fundamental principles of the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You can ask about establishment. UNPA can be created in different ways. In our view, the most promising approach at this time is to establish the Assembly as a new subsidiary organ of the General Assembly under the Article 22 of the UN Charter. This assessment is based on the procedure has been applied several times to establish the UN organs. A majority vote of the General Assembly is sufficient. The affiliation to the General Assembly puts the UNPA at the center of the UN system. The status as a UN subsidiary organ enables the performance of a comprehensive spectrum of global tasks, as well as the independence indispensable for parliamentary work. The annual sessions of the General Assembly allow for a continuous assessment and future development of the Assembly. And other procedures for the establishment of the UNPA that should continue to be evaluated are the negotiations of an international treaty or the upgrading of a parliamentary network previously established at UN as preliminary step. With regard to the Interparliamentary Union, IPU, we advocate a complementary relationship with the UNPA as both bodies fulfill different functions. To strengthen the participation of civil society in the UN, as Professor Umeaura said, as an additional body besides UNPA should be eliminated. In case of chapter reform, we promote a global two-chamber system in which states and the people are represented in separate assemblies entrusted with the responsibility and endued with the power to tackle political issues that can best be addressed at the global level based on the principle of subsidiarity. Concluding, I have to say that a central world forum based on democratic legitimacy and fair representation would be an institution respected by people all over the world, where global problems are publicly discussed and tackled, where experts' knowledge, creative solutions, and holistic views are introduced to the global debate. Politicians will face increased public pressure for globally responsible actions. At the same time, the representation of a broad spectrum of political views and the debates within the UNPA would open up improved prospects for ongoing process of global education and opinion formation. Through the discussions in the plenary and the work in the committees, the UNPA will develop into a global hub for the communication, exchange, and networking of innovative forces in politics and civil society. In this institutional context, political active citizens from different countries, experts, and decision makers from politics and society would be able to join forces in public debates and collaborative work, as well as to present their concerns to global parliamentarians. At the same time, they would help advance political initiatives of the UNPA at different levels of society. Finally, I address an invitation to a common reflection. When we look at the global political scene, we see more confrontation. We see now more competition and less cooperation. Look, for example, at the UN General Assembly, for instance. Those gatherings seem more like a collective meal with a la carte opinions. So our challenge is establishing the UN Parliamentary Assembly is to establish a collective meal with a buffet instead of a la carte. So we need to share common food for thought. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Suarez. Let's give a big hands. Okay, this is the first proposal, UNPA, Parliamentary Assembly. And let's move to the second proposal as equally interesting and challenging. So now directly people's participation, UN World Citizen Initiative by Caroline Berenarlian, the Democracy International. Please, Caroline, you have a floor.
Thank you very much, Anselmo, and thank you to the May 18th Memorial Foundation for organizing this wonderful forum and for inviting us. I would like to share a presentation. I'm going to see if I can make that work.
Oh, yes, you can.
Just a minute. I believe. Can everybody see that? Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so I'm very happy to share with you an idea which we think that will give people around the world a way to help set the course for the UN. It's called the UN World Citizens Initiative, and it's a proposal that that's put forth by Democracy Without Borders, Civicus, and Democracy International, where I work, and that's supported by many organizations around the world, including our colleagues here on this panel. So first I'd like to talk a little bit about the problem, but I think Mr. Umeaura gave us a good introduction into this already. Today we are faced with really global challenges, global warming, peace and security issues, globalized health crises. I mean, the reason that this forum is taking place online, right? And I think that you would all agree with me that it is that they are some of the most important issues that we face today. And that they are issues that no single country can actually tackle by themselves. So this is the reason why we set up complex multilateral systems like the UN, where we can coordinate and cooperate to address the problems that are too big for single nation states. But the UN has a challenge of its own. It is intransparent, it is inaccessible for citizens. Decisions at the UN are taken by bodies that are composed of representatives of governments, of member states, and it is very hard for citizens to hold the people who represent them there directly accountable for decisions that are made there. And so that makes it very, very difficult or virtually impossible for citizens to take influence on decision-making at the UN. And this is really a problem because ordinary people don't feel connected to decisions that are made on the global level, and other issues that are very important to people around the globe never make it onto the agenda at all. And of course, if you look at the history of the United Nations, that makes sense. It was built 75 years ago in a world that was in tatters after the Second World War, and the primary objective was to avoid conflict between nation states. It was not critical and it was not possible to involve citizens more closely in UN decision-making. But we live in a changed world. We have more possibilities today. And the problems that we face are just of a different nature altogether. So we need a diverse spectrum of actors on board to address the challenges we have as well. So we think that involving citizens in global decision-making will lead to better decisions that are more responsive of the concerns that people everywhere have. And the democratic deficit that the UN has, it causes it to lose credibility and goodwill, and it also undermines the organization itself. So we've seen that the UN has come under increasing pressure in the last years, especially budgetary also. And so this is also a question of will the UN be able to survive and how will it be able to survive? Because we need a multilateral forum to address these existential issues that we face today. And so this is why we propose a UN World Citizens Initiative. It's a tool, an instrument that would allow citizens to table a proposal for a resolution at the UN General Assembly or the UN Security Council. And so we came up with an idea for how it would work. The proposal would be that 10 citizens would form a committee and draft a proposal. Their proposal would have to be about something naturally that is in the competences of the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council. And it should be in line with the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, naturally. Ideally, that the proposal satisfies all these criteria would be checked by a secretariat or an administrative board that is hosted by the UN itself. And to make sure that these proposals really carry a global reach, we also propose that these citizens come from different countries representing a fair geographical distribution. Our proposal would be to use the distribution that is used to allocate seats to non-permanent members on the Security Council, being 5 from African and Asian states, 1 from Eastern Europe, 2 from Latin American states, and 2 from Western Europe and other states. Once an initiative is accepted and registered, this committee can then start to gather signatures of support around the world. Our proposal is that they would need 5 million signatures from at least 10 countries within 18 months. Again, these 10 countries need to represent fair geographical distribution, the same as the committee, to show that this is really a proposal that carries global support from people around the world. And then there's the response phase. So the idea would be that an initiative that is successful in collecting these signatures would automatically make it onto the agenda of the UN General Assembly or the UN Security Council, depending on the proposal itself, and that it would be debated and voted on. And if it is denied, that ideally member states would formulate some sort of opinion or argue why it was denied. So this is very simply, we have a much more detailed study that explains this whole proposal in detail, and I will post a link afterwards in the chat. So we have reason to believe that that this is, I mean, we obviously think it's a good idea, and we think it can work for a number of reasons. So the first thing we did when we came up with this was ask 2 independent academic experts to look into if such an instrument is even legally feasible, how would this ideally work, and how could we even go about introducing this at the UN. And their recommendation was very clear. It would work, and it would be relatively easy to set up. Under Article 22 of the UN Charter, the General Assembly may establish subsidiary organs as it deems necessary for the performance of its functions. So the General Assembly itself could actually set up an administrative board that would accept UN World Citizens initiatives. The second reason that we know is it could work, it's been mentioned before, I believe Andreas said it, is citizens themselves actually think it's a good idea. So last year at the 75th anniversary, there was this series of dialogues and consultations with over 1.5 million citizens in all member states. And actually, a UN World Citizens Initiative, along with the UN Parliamentary Assembly, was one of the proposals that was put forward a lot by citizens themselves as a good idea to bridge this gap. We also have broad civil society support. So over 300 organizations have supported the World Citizens Initiative. Livingston Sebanyana, who is the UN independent expert on the promotion of the democratic and equitable international order, has also expressed his support. The Coalition for the UN We Need, who've also introduced their work already, have included it in their UN 75 People's Declaration. So it's really also something that civil society sees as a tool that they can use. And finally, I think maybe this is our biggest proof that it could work. It can work because it already exists somewhere else. So since 2012 in the European Union, it is possible for citizens to propose legislation through the European Citizens Initiative. Meaning 7 people can come up with a proposal, and if they can convince 1 million people in at least 7 EU member states, the Commission obliges itself to respond to this proposal, and the Parliament holds a public hearing. And this tool has been used here in Europe already almost 80 times in these 9 years. And 6 European Citizens Initiatives were successful, and it has led to reforms in drinking water management, pesticide regulations. So it's definitely not a perfect tool, we know that, but it is working here, and we also see that it is something that civil society can use really to rally around issues that are important to them. Yeah, so to wrap up, I think what's really important to know is that we have real momentum right now. As it was mentioned, Secretary General Guterres is drafting a roadmap for the future of the UN and looking at how the UN can be upgraded. And then it really shows that there is a realization and a willingness to change the UN, to set out a different course and to bring it closer to citizens. We have incredible technological opportunities today that allow for this global participation. So we should really try to use them and to involve citizens more, and to create a more inclusive and more democratic UN. So if you are interested in this, and Andreas mentioned it already as well, but we would be really happy to have you on board. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Caroline, for very clear-cut proposal. I was smiling because I'm wearing, that means 5 years, I'm 18, but you talk about 5 million at 18 months. I'm sure the May 18 Foundation will fully support and more than support, taking initiative in Korea with all the members, especially your symbolic number is very good, 5, 10, 18, that really, so exactly the spirit of May 18 Foundation. And this, so we'll discuss more, Korea, Asia, ASEAN. Remember, 2/3 of humanity, world population live in Asia, So I think it's crucial to mobilize people in Asia to reach our target 5 million, even beyond 5 million, it can be 10 million, to show, people power to the world, especially the United Nations. So let's go to the next one. So as you know, the UN has a lot of internal problem, fragmentation. That's why this campaign was very important, equally important to UNPA and Global Citizen Initiative, UN Civil Society Envoy. So now we have Rihanna Nae from Together First. Could you please introduce this very interesting initiative? Please, Rihanna, you have a floor.
Thank you, Anselmo. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. Good morning. It's a pleasure to represent the Together First campaign today and present the proposal for a civil society envoy at the UN. Together First is a global civil society coalition set up in 2018 to campaign for fair, open, and inclusive decision-making to solve global challenges. We firmly believe that it is in the interest of humanity to improve collaboration between the UN, member states, and civil society. Civil society is an invaluable partner in helping the UN to reach its full potential, in service provision, as human rights defenders, as a watchdog function, in research and analysis, campaigning, and increasingly in data collection. It acts as a crucial bridge between the UN and we the peoples, helping to ensure accountability, legitimacy, and buy-in from a wider public. But as has been discussed, despite their many contributions, civil society groups face repeated challenges in securing space at the decision-making table. At present, larger and better resourced organizations, particularly those with a presence in New York and Geneva, continue to have disproportionate access. Other important elements of civil society, smaller or under-resourced organizations, NGOs working in areas where digital access is an issue, indigenous peoples, farmers, and parliamentarians remain underrepresented. Grassroots organizations whose politics cause member states to deny them accreditation are locked out of the conversation, and we've seen this become a problem more exacerbated during the pandemic. The UN 75 Declaration acknowledged the need to make the UN more inclusive, and member states requested that the UN Secretary General report back before the end of the 75th session with recommendations to advance this agenda, or to use the SG's terminology, our common agenda. Last year, Together First launched a dedicated report presenting the case for a civil society champion. Our proposal urges the Secretary General to use this opportunity to advance his promise to design a system-wide strategy on civic space and to create and reinforce channels for effective participation. Specifically, we call on him to designate a senior official as a champion for civil society and provide them with the resourcing and support needed to deliver simple but crucial objectives. These include increasing the organization's limited capacity to engage with civil society, more consistency in arrangements for civil society engagement across the UN system, and most importantly, giving greater opportunities and assistance for civil society organizations to engage with the UN, particularly those from the Global South. The task of the champion will be to monitor and assess civil society engagement across the UN system, finding any inconsistencies and roadblocks, and working together with states to overcome them with the vocal support of the Secretary General. The Office of the Champion does not need to be large. Our research models a potential future office on the office of the former ASG for External Relations under Kofi Annan, which had around 6 full-time staffers and was widely regarded as a highly effective initiative. The post could be located within the Executive Office of the Secretary General or outside of it, as with the UN Youth Envoy. Either way, support from and access to the Secretary General will be vital, as well as access to other parts of the UN system, including in the field. We are delighted that support for this proposal at both the grassroots and international level is growing rapidly. More than 50 states and over 200 NGOs have endorsed the Unmute Civil Society Coalition's call for inclusive and meaningful civil society participation at the UN. The coalition is led by the permanent missions of Denmark and of Costa Rica, the UN Foundation, Civicus, Action for Sustainable Development, Global Focus, Action Aid, and Forus. One of the coalition's key recommendations was to appoint a special envoy for civil society working for civic space at the UN. And as has also been mentioned last month, Democracy International, Democracy Without Borders, and Civicus built on this with their civil society statement, which was supported by more than 150 organizations. As well as the UNPA and the UNWCI, 2 great proposals you've just heard more about, this powerful statement calls for a civil society envoy to enable greater participation and inclusion, and we encourage you to sign it. And this month, we had a campaign breakthrough. At Antonio Guterres' General Assembly hearing, he raised the need for a mechanism to make sure that we integrate the contributions of key partners, including civil society, into the UN strategic thinking and decision-making process. With this wealth of states, civil society, and now with the Secretary General's support on this agenda, it is clear that this is an idea whose time has come. We must now all pull together to make sure this idea gets over the finish line. How can you all help is the question I'm sure you're asking. I encourage colleagues from across civil society to join us in this endeavour. One key action you can all take is to participate in the UN's new digital consultation, which will inform the Secretary General's upcoming report to member states. Together First has submitted the results of our own consultation, including our proposal for a civil society champion. You can support the campaign for a civil society envoy by signing up and voting for our proposal by May 21st. Together First looks forward to working with you on this timely and necessary campaign. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Raini, for another excellent presentation. So now we have a very concrete 3 proposals. So how to translate that into concrete action on the ground, particularly Asia. So now they're to invite Charles Santiago, the APHR, ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. Do you know the population in South ASEAN is about 600 million people? Right? So I think their participation is very important. So I'd like to give a floor to Charles Santiago, so Member of Parliament from Malaysia and also Chair of APHR. Charles, you have a floor. Are you based in Kuala Lumpur now, Malaysia?
I have no choice but to be here.
Okay, yeah. Okay, please, you have a floor. Please.
Thanks, Anselmo, and I extend my greetings of peace and solidarity for the rest of the people on the platform. I must confess that I don't work very much on the UN in particular, but I was doing Anselmo a favor when he was pushing me, I want to engage you guys, the parliamentarians on the UN issue. So I just obliged him. But just having heard the 3 presentations earlier, I'm actually quite convinced that the UN can be a platform for change. The organization I represent here, the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, focuses a lot on ASEAN and not so much on the UN. But the UN comes as part of our engagement for a variety of reasons. The most recent one was on Myanmar, where we had to make where we are looking forward to some kind of a leadership from the UN Security Council on the way forward in Myanmar, given the overthrow of an elected government on February 1st, 2021. And just by looking at the way the decisions are made, one needs to wonder what really is going on and whether the proposals that have been put forward here, I think the three proposals. One is the Parliamentary Assembly, the World Citizens Initiative, and the one that Rihanna just talked about earlier. These are great initiatives, but looking at the way the thinking at the UN Security Council, which whose support you would need to have these engagements to be put in place, I think this is going to be a challenge. It's going to be really a challenge. I look at, for example, the role of China, for example, and the role of the United States. Now, when it came to Myanmar, and of course, China is an ally of Myanmar and the military, China was quite good, I must say, though. I mean, they opposed the resolution, but when I say good, I just want to point out here that they said something quite interesting, that they were against the violence, against the overthrow, and said, let's hand over, and the government and the elected government must be brought back to govern the country. That was good, and although in the voting, they voted against the resolution. But look what the US did when it came to Israel. They didn't want to have any discussion on Israel. They said, this we completely will not support this thing. There was no middle ground here. China saw a middle ground and they took advantage of a middle ground. But the US said, no, we are against any kind of criticism on Israel. I understand there are domestic politics involved, domestic concerns, and so on and so forth. But when you have good policies like this, like the UN Parliamentary Assembly, the UN World Citizens Initiative, and I look at the way the five guys who sit around the table and make the decisions for all of us. Now, do you think they're going to accept this? I don't know. But this is a lot of work. It's a lot of geopolitical work, a lot of campaigning. And we, on our part, really as parliamentarians, we speak to our governments on the way the UN has to work. And sometimes when we listen to some of the feedback, it's like a corporate capture. This expression, corporate capture, that the UN and its agencies are completely controlled by individual countries, as well as big corporations, like the World Health Organization, for example. It is part of the UN network. It's part of the UN network, but you get the impression sometimes it is the Gates Foundation that is running the business of the World Health Organization. For example, just in the rollout of the COVAX, for example, who's managing COVAX? It is supposed to be the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is an arm of the United Nations, but the people who are actually running the show are multinational corporations that are parked through what you call Gavi and CPI. So you can see a corporate capture in place, though, of the UN agencies, as well as the UN Security Council, if you want, because of this interest, geopolitical interest, and other kinds of interests. So there is a challenge, I must say, though. I must say that there is a major challenge. While we look for greater space, for more for civil society participation, parliamentary participation as well. I mean, I think the UN Parliament idea is a good one for countries where there is no elections, for example, where there is no democracy in place, where the UN Assembly, UN Parliament Assembly can give voice to this. But there is the issue of, what do you call it, recognition. You must be a parliamentarian to be part of the process. But if a country has got more elections, how do you get into the system to begin with? So there are these challenges. I think a civil society space which interfaces with the UN Security Council will be a great idea, I think. And that's one of the attractions of the UN World Citizens Initiative, where there is a direct interface. So before the UN Security Council makes a decision, there is an interface with civil society. And who gets to elect the civil society? Who gets to choose okay, this 10 of them will represent us, and this 5 of them will represent another group. There's a process in place, but that is a work in progress, I admit. But I think the idea is there, and I think it is a very challenging one, but a very innovative one. I mean, we have platform today, lots of platforms that can bring lots of ideas together. And the question is, how do we channel this platform into creating that space? Sometimes I think the space is better off outside the system than within the system. Sometimes when you are caught within the system, you play by the rules. And who sets up the rules? It is not you or I or the civil society groups or parliamentarians that determine the rules. It is determined by the rule by people who control the system. So sometimes being outside, you don't play by the same rules. I think we need to look at that perspective as well. But I just look at what's happening in Myanmar, for example, and the UN's response. UN was quite good. They said there's no traction here. Let's give it to ASEAN. But you can see China's role is quite interesting, though. Very subtle, but very interesting. Whereas the US position on Israel is very blatant. No discussion on this, though. We will not support the resolution. But the Chinese were different. They said, look, we don't support the overthrow. We don't support the military overthrow. That's one. We want the previous government to be back in power. And let's have engagement. Let's have dialogue. And we think ASEAN should be the partner for that dialogue, given that Myanmar is part of ASEAN. So I think the thinking process is there. The question is, how do we interface? Would a parliamentary assembly be an interface? Would a World Citizens Initiative be an interface? I think this is challenging. This is a work in progress. And also to have 5 million people to support a resolution or an initiative is very challenging. Although it has been done in the European Union, but to get 5 million people from Africa, I mean, we were trying to get just parliament members to sign on to a letter to ASEAN and to the UN on Myanmar, and we couldn't even touch 400. Yeah. 400 members of parliament all over the world. It's challenging, I tell you. But we tried. But as the saying goes, you try until you find a point where you can create that space. I think it is a challenge of that space. How do we define that space? And who defines that space and the rules of that space that will ultimately determine the way forward. Thanks, Anselmo. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, guys. You are real politician on the ground, So
yeah, I'm an activist in parliament.
And to help us to be very realistic in our approach, I'm sure that you agree to our common cause, but
yes.
we have to really develop the good strategies. I think after listening to you, I thought maybe we need a two-track approach. One is ASEAN Parliamentary Assembly, ASEAN Citizen Initiative, at the same time global both, ASEAN and global, to make it more relevant to the people on the ground. Okay, let's go to the next discussion. Dr. Shin Young-sik, he's an advisor to the ADN, Asia Democracy Network, which already part of this coalition, the campaign. And also he was the first Secretary General of the ADN. And also he has been working for many years, the Korea Democracy Foundation. So he's very influential. I'm sure he will get, by the way, Andrea, has Ban Ki-moon signed this, our statement campaign? Former Secretary General of UN?
Well, we need to invite him to sign up. So
okay,
perhaps
so we can give the mission
he might do it.
To make sure that the Ban Ki-moon sign, in our campaign. Okay, Dr. Singh, you have a floor, please.
Thank you, Anselmo. I'm happy to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers of the session for inviting me. I learned a lot from the presentations. I'll make a comment prepared. Despite the United Nations' major role and the significant achievements in the international community over the past 76 years, there is an urgent need to change in order to meet the expectations of the present and the future. As you know, the issue of UN's reform began to be actively discussed. General Kofi Annan, UN, in September 2000. But in fact, it has been constantly discussed by the previous secretaries since the establishment of the UN in 1945. In order to accomplish UN's reform, the UN needs to overcome following challenges. First, the UN has to expand its financial resources. Second, the UN has to break its internal culture of inaction. And third, the UN has to draw external support from the global citizens as the attentive public who could legitimize UN's reform and UN's strengthening. As you know, as stated in the first passage of the preamble of the UN Charter, the subject of UN is not state, but the peoples. And as stated in Chapter 1 of the Charter, the purpose of UN is to take effective collective measures for international peace and security. In addition, it strengthens peace and promotes human rights and fundamental freedoms based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination. In other words, the UN is an intergovernmental organization, but it is the interests of each country and sharing interests, but an organization aiming at the purpose of being a community of countries based on humanity. I can point out that the identity of the UN should be considered not only from the perspective of government or national interests of each state, but also from the perspective of global citizens and the citizens' communities. So the purpose of UN's reform should reflect the perspective of global citizens and the citizens' commitments. In particular, after the end of the Cold War, some scholars and activists are increasingly voicing that the reform of the UN should include not only internal interests, but also the voices of global citizens. In case of COVID-19 pandemic situation, the United Nations was certainly not the only governance organization to grossly mishandle the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was among the worst. From the beginning, United Nations agencies such as WHO did not act fast enough to declare the pandemic, push for access and information, or organize various aspects of the international response, from the vaccines and the supply chains. As is well known, democracy has basically been realized at the national level. Today, have the meaning of proposals to extend the realization of democracy to the global agenda. It is a step forward proposal in the sense of participating of Parliament, because Parliament can represent the opinions of the civil society and the citizen voices of each country rather than diplomatic national interests. Even if some of the voices of civil society can be reflected, which can be basis for realizing global representative democracy. The World Citizens Initiative is a way to realize direct democracy at the global level. Citizens initiatives are well established as a state level democratic instruments. But the only transnational application is the European Citizens Initiative, which is a major democratic innovation introduced following the Lisbon Treaty in 2008. Caroline explained well already. United Nations Parliament Assembly and the World Citizens Initiative are greater step forward in the sense of a dual strategy of realizing representative democracy and direct democracy. Democracy must proceed simultaneously at the global level and the national level. I think South Korea's true role is to present a wise solution to international issues that are difficult for other countries to solve in the framework of developing countries or advanced countries. The symbolic examples of issues that require South Korea's role include ODA policy and poverty countermeasures, global environmental protection, including global crisis, and securing good global governance, such as United Nations reform. Recently, I read carefully the letter sent by Andreas to MOFA of South Korea. The Korean civil society will make efforts so that the members of the National Assembly pursue a global perspective of UNDN. It is a pity, including UN, to take no action against the Myanmar incidents, even though the Myanmar military slaughters numerous citizens. Looking at the recent crisis in Myanmar or Israel, the United Nations must be reformed. UN have to take effective collective measures for international peace and security from the perspective of peace, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sin. So it's good to know that you are already on board, you are taking actions. So you share also some strategies which are very important to Korea on board. Do you know not only the Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, we have the first Asian UN Secretary General, there's Utan from Myanmar, but Myanmar is now crisis. So I think the Asians, I think we need to make a more contribution to this type of global while we are doing within Asia, the governance within Asia, like ASEAN, South Asia. Unfortunately, Northeast Asia, there is no such an international body, So anyway, so let's take up this global and at the same time, regional challenges. Okay, so now after listening to all these proposals and discussion, I want to give a floor back to Andrea and Yasmina to give us your view, your comment on those presentations. Andrea, back to you.
Thank you very much, Anselmo, and also thanks to all speakers for these spot on and great presentations, which I think have opened the floor for a lot of discussion. And if you allow, I would like to pick one element that has been pointed out by Charles Santiago, which is really the question of how politically realization and implementation could actually look like. And of course, we have heard a lot of more elements that require consideration. For instance, why are we focused on the UN in the first place? Why couldn't we do something outside the UN and build a different space? But on the first point, I agree that the political obstacles that we are facing, they are very huge. And of course, that's what's been pointed out. The root causes here are really, first of all, the composition of the Security Council, which gives permanent members a veto over any changes of a charter. and also that the UN is an intergovernmental organization that has no integration perspective. You know, like in the European Union, from the beginning, there was always the idea that this intergovernmental institution should move over time towards supranational integration. And the problem at the UN is, and that's why the analogy doesn't work exactly, the problem with the UN is that it is a static organization that has no vision about its own development in the future. It is static and has no such vision. And so politically, I would like to shift our focus a little bit, because of course it is true, countries that do not accept democratic rights at home, they do not accept them in other fora either, like, you know, at the UN. So they are obstacles. But in my perspective, having advocating these proposals for a long time, I believe that the issue is elsewhere, and that's we need to ask ourselves, why are even the progressive and democratic governments not pushing this forward? Because they are not. The European Union is not doing it. You know, democratic countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, they are not doing it either. Because my thinking is, if there was a strong push by democratic governments in the UN to do this, it would be successful. But we need to ask ourselves, why is this not happening? So I guess that my speculation is that underlying all rhetoric, they are also quite happy with the status quo. They don't want civil participation and parliamentary representation at the UN either. They don't want that. So looking at China and Russia and so on, that's an excuse, and it's not really a reason why should this not be pushed forward. So much from me, and let's discuss this and other points further.
Okay, thank you for your the comment and answer to some of the questions, Andrea. And now Yasmina, back to you. So what is your take and what is your response to some of the questions, particularly the Charles put very critical questions. Yasmina?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Sorry, I'm just collecting my thoughts here. It's still a bit early in New York. I think I actually would prefer not to comment now and see if we have any Q&As from the audience.
Yeah. Okay, so you want to speak later?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, good. And then Professor Umeau라, would you like to say now?
I think it's time to open the floor. Otherwise, we don't have much time.
Okay, now I'm checking our chatting to see what are the questions. I didn't see the specific questions. That's why, you know, I think now the floor is open for open discussion, but already some questions raised by Charles and then Jin Young-sik. So we are free to respond to some of the questions. Okay, or if not, Umeau라, I don't know, anybody can feel free to join this conversation. We have a focus and others, not only the presenters, anybody in the room can join our discussion. So if you want to speak, yes, I see the hands up, the focus. Yes, please.
Thanks, Anselmo, and thanks for some great presentations. So I'm Fergus Watt from the Coalition for the UN. We need a colleague of Yasmina and many of the speakers here. As has been mentioned, the coalition has supported all three of the concrete proposals that were presented here. And so the second part of my intervention is really gets down to what Andreas was just talking about, which is strategy and tactics. How can we move these ideas forward in the context of the UN system as we find it? First, I appreciated Charles Santiago's comments, but there's one element that I do disagree with, which is the power of the Security Council to and the permanent 5 to prevent some of these initiatives from going forward. I think that it's too often the case that people look at the veto and the power of the P5 and think that nothing can be done. But historically, the General Assembly has achieved quite a lot on its own, even without the agreement and concurrence of the permanent members. Examples include treaties such as the Landmines Treaty, and most recently the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The International Criminal Court was created over the objections of China, Russia, and the USA. And so we know that when there is the will, middle and small powers in the General Assembly, working with civil society, mobilizing public opinion, can create meaningful change in global governance and international law. So how do we move forward some of the ideas here? I think a couple of years ago, Andreas and I were at a meeting at the UN, and I raised a question then that I still haven't answered for myself, which is, and it pertains to the World Citizens Initiative. Perhaps Carolyn has a comment on this, but the question is, how do we create it? You mentioned Article 22, but do we need a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly? Is it possible? I mean, we're talking about getting topics that have demonstrated citizen support and concern onto the General Assembly agenda. That's the objective of the WCI. So what is actually required to do this? Could we do this, for example, with a smaller number of states? I think we really need to do our homework and look at some of the different ways that agenda items are raised at the UNGA, and think about for example, I'm just thinking out loud here. So if we had a dozen countries instead of 2/3 of the 193, but they were representative of the world's regions and a significant number of a significant size, would that be sufficient if those governments all agreed that if we did the hard work of getting the 5 million signatures and fulfilled the relevant criteria, if those governments just said in advance, well, we'll put the thing on the agenda and see what happens. Is this a possible? Is this within the rules of the General Assembly? And I don't know the answer to that, and it's sort of on my personal homework to-do list. But I think it's we do need to think a little more in a more detailed way about some of the strategies about how we move some of these ideas forward. And I think that goes for some of the other proposals as well. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Fergus, for your very insightful comment. As you highlighted, it can be the middle and small power diplomacy, so we can achieve, even without consent from P5. I think that's a very important lesson we need to learn, from the past, successful, the campaigns. Okay, so floor is still open. Anyone, for instance, Suarez, Caroline, Diana, if you want to answer. Okay, yes, Diana first, please, and then Caroline. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to what Fergus mentioned about kind of creating a post. So specifically when it comes to the civil society envoy, like any senior post, it could be created by the Secretary General without member state approval. So, however, if they want to resource the office out of regular funds, they would require approval from the General Assembly's 5th committee. But without member state agreement, we could still fund the office from voluntary contributions. And as I mentioned in my presentation, there is state support for an envoy. So while the civil society envoy is not a fix for all of the issues that have been rightfully raised in this conversation, it will unlock further progress. And for this reason, Together First believes that we should all support the civil society envoy idea and increase civil society up the political agenda at the UN, because I think just getting the foot in the door will lead to more productive and important conversations on this matter.
Okay, thank you, Rihanna. Before Caroline, I want to also pose one interesting question. You know, it could be also effective when you convince or when you reach out to ordinary people. Things could have been different if we have this system, you know, citizens initiative and parliament. For instance, the vaccine issue, you know, the vaccine inequality issue or Myanmar issue, you know. So I think we need to tell people things could have been different if we have this system, something like that, you know. So that people have some clear idea. It's not very abstract, you know. Things can be different, something like that. So I want to ask Caroline. So when you reach out people, how do you convince people? You know. So now we are discussing strategies. We are all on board. So question is how? You know, Caroline, you have a floor, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe I will start with that. I think convincing people is the easiest of our tasks right now, because we have some very clear examples of global issues that sometimes just don't make it onto the agenda, and I think climate change is another great example there, where a lot of citizens around the world are concerned, but often feel like their governments or the people who represent them at the UN don't pay sufficient attention to this. And this World Citizens Initiative would allow them to get it onto the agenda directly and at least have the debate there. So I think I think you're absolutely right, and it's an excellent suggestion that we should think of these practical examples of what would be good topics for World Citizens Initiatives, and reach the people by showing them how something would work. I took a couple of notes because there were many questions, I think, on the Citizens Initiative. So I'll go back to Fergus. A very specific question, and a very legal question. I would also need to do a little more homework, but I think we would only need a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly if the General Assembly regards it as an important question. It might be possible to get to establish the subsidiary organ under Article 22 with a simple majority. So at least that is something. I'm not sure if there is a way to go around this vote in the General Assembly. That's something that we would also have to look into. But of course, what is very clear is that what we need, apart from a lot of people supporting all three of these proposals, by the way, is also member state support. So it is very clear that that is the way that we have to go, is that we have to convince as many member states as possible. And then finally, I would like to comment on something that Charles Santiago said. If it wouldn't be better to work outside of the system, why are we trying to work in the UN? And so I think what you can't forget is that these proposals are also, all three of these proposals also have a very big transformative potential. So the idea is obviously not just that, you know, we with our proposals would somehow conform to the system of the UN as it is, but also that it would change the UN from the inside. And we could have a very philosophical debate about this, but at least what we've seen in Europe with the European Citizens Initiative, I just think, I know that not all of the parallels work, but it is a good example, is that it creates a sense of responsibility. from member states who support the idea, for example, but who don't have a majority or who don't have a sufficiently loud voice in the General Assembly, they can then use these tools and say, yes, but it is supported by civil society. Look at these 5 million citizens who supported this issue. So it is also something that reinforces the powers of the people who are already now part of the UN system. So it would, in our view, it would make the representativeness of the UN better. And it also, at least in the case of a World Citizens Initiative, and also in the UN Parliamentary Assembly and the civil society envoy, it creates a public discussion. So this is something that is in my opinion totally lacking right now. What happens at the UN, it's not intentional, but there is very little global debate on for example the General Assembly sessions, the debates that go on there. So if citizens have a way to influence what's discussed there, people will also pay more attention. So with this sort of output legitimacy and this self-obligation to do something, and with the UN taking the responsibility to listen to people, people will also feel like it matters that they put something on the agenda there. And so the idea is, of course, that this creates a global public sphere and debate on topics, and so that it reinforces also the UN to become a better institution. So I'll just leave that there because I think there's probably more questions.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I say something?
Oh, yes, you can respond, Charles.
Yes,
Thanks, Anselmo. I worked for the UN for some time. When I was studying in New York, I worked for the UN Center for Transnational Cooperation. It was just in front of the from the General Assembly building. So I used to go there for meetings and so on and so forth. And I saw how power was organized. I saw how people thought how power was organized, what got onto the agenda, what did not get onto the agenda, and how numbers were being manipulated and so on and so forth, including the business lobby that was operating in the vicinity. And sometimes, more importantly, outside the vicinity, all the pubs and bars and so on and so forth. That place is full of power, though. And I think how we work around it and how we work with it needs a bit of thinking through. And also you need champions. And the champions could come from some progressive European nation or African nation, or some champion who's got clout within the Security Council as well as the Assembly to really pump the ground. I think this is something that is very feasible, it's doable. Look at Finland, for example. They have a good system in place. They could help. Now you have 4 women who are leading the Finnish government, and that's something that we can work on. And I also think that the point that Anselmo made earlier on soft diplomacy. I think soft diplomacy always gets, it's not threatening. When you go with the threatening agenda, people don't want to touch you because it's dynamite, it can burst, it can blow up anytime. But if you go, the soft diplomacy, maybe on climate change, but not Greta type climate change, though. A different approach, something that's acceptable to everybody. I think you can create some kind of a linkage, though. Then again, you need champions within the governments which got influence in the council, Security Council, and also the larger assembly, and also soft diplomacy that actually very well is targeted and you move in a certain fashion. Thanks, Anselmo.
Okay, thank you. Before I give floor to other speakers, I want to echo one point by the Caroline. One of the important aspects of this campaign is education, global citizen education. As you know, target 4.7 and SDG. And this can be very useful educational tool, for students, young people, When we, for instance, last year when we discussed UN 75, there was a question, what kind of world by 2045, A lot of young people in South Korea, they join this global conversation, So I think this can be very concrete, idea so that they can imagine more concretely, what kind of global governance they can develop, So I want to highlight, it can be not only the political campaign, but educational tool for global citizen education, which is a basis for global government. Okay, now let's continue. Suarez, do you have anything to comment on these questions?
Yes.
Or also feel free. Yes, please, Suarez first.
Yes, thank you. I would like to talk about the financing, but because I think it's really important to tell you about the amount of financing UNPA. We think that we will need around 20 to 35 million US dollar, which can be provided from the general UN budget and through voluntary contributions. With the introduction of direct elections, the financial requirements can increase. And to cover the resulting costs, we recommend that in addition to a core budget from which the actual tasks of the UNPA are financed, supplementary budget should be established, which is to be funded by those states opting for direct elections. And if voluntary contributions are made by governments, international organizations, individuals, companies, and other legal entities, the independence of the assembly must be guaranteed. I think that is important to tell, because this assembly will need the money to go on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for raising also important issue on finance. Now, Professor Umeru, you want to speak now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Regarding I have 2 points. One is I'm quite surprised at hearing the Caroline's comment. It's easy to get people. You know, I thought due to this COVID-19 pandemic, many people become or have global identity to be serious, to take actions. But what I saw is not much, unfortunately. So I really wonder, is global citizenship education enough to increase the number of awakened citizens? So because as a university professor, I'm teaching many young peoples, and they are quite stimulated and awakened, but once they start working, they forgot everything. They're too busy, and they have to sustain their life, making money, etc. So I really don't have answer to increase the number of people awakened. That's one commented questions. A second one regarding the financing, I think it's very important, and that's my areas. I think it's really time for us to realize global tax. Without it, I think it's really impossible to generate enough amount of, for example, achieving SDGs. We need $400 trillion a year just for developing countries to achieve SDGs. How is it possible without such innovative systems? So I just would like to point out global tax should be a part of the campaign or part of the proposals. So I just would like to know your response from anyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to invite, there's one comment in the chatting room from ASEAN. To do this, we educate the public and raise awareness, colleagues with a like-minded organization, and mobilize activists and volunteers. This is one suggestion for your consideration. Andreas, you want to speak now? I see the hands up. Unmute, please. Unmute.
Sorry. Yes, I mean, we have had some more very interesting interventions, and I also just wanted to stress first that, of course, this Article 22 in the UN Charter is our magic tool that allows us to move forward with these things, at least in legal, formal ways, without Security Council approval. But the question of financing really brings to the forefront the need actually to get member states on board, and that we cannot do something outside the UN system, because we don't only want them to politically support these proposals, but we actually want them to finance them too. I mean, that's the thing, right? That, I mean, these would be official bodies and instruments financed in some way or another through the UN in this case. And if we would go any way, I mean, any path outside the UN, the question comes up, I mean, we might be able to establish that, but we wouldn't have any money to do it. And at the UN, the problem is we cannot establish but we might have the money to do it. So I think that, and a general comment on taxation, I think this is really, really crucial. We had a debate on the Citizens Initiative last year with some civil society experts, and actually the question of a carbon tax was one that was put forward as a subject that could be raised by one of the first citizens initiatives, if a tool would exist. However, I mean, we might get support for a consultative parliamentary assembly. I don't think that's impossible, but global taxation is altogether a different thing. As you know, taxation, as you are well aware, is considered a key component of national sovereignty. So, and I mean, UN ambassadors, they even flinch back from the idea that parliamentarians in a consultative way might be involved at the UN. And I mean, I am 100% convinced we need global taxation. And I'm also 100% convinced that this needs to be tied to the idea of a world parliament. No taxation without representation, proper representation. But I fear that if we, at this stage, tie it together, we make our effort, you know, altogether impossible. So, I mean, intellectually, theoretically, I think it's absolutely true. But really, we need to get back to the question, how do we even convince the progressive governments to embrace this? I mean, like Korea, Germany, where I am sitting right now, they are, I mean, to my knowledge, they are not on board with anything of this. So let's not speak about China, but let's speak about why is South Korea not supporting this? Why is Germany not supporting this? Why is Canada not supporting this? And so on. I think that's really the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we have about 5-10 minutes. So anybody wants to make a final comment on the topic? Because I want to, okay, Uemura, one more. Let me see how many more.
Thank you. I really resonate with Andreas, and but I want to see the situation in Europe. Because of the COVID-19, European Union created a big fund for tackling COVID and economy. And there, because the fund is too big, there's a lack of money. And currently, there's a discussion to introduce a financial transaction tax in this regard. So I think if EU can make it, this could be a trigger to spread the world. That's my optimistic hope, but I think there's no, how can I put it, I don't have English word. But anyway, I really see the situations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So lastly, I want to ask Yasmina, you want to make any concluding remark? Because you didn't speak before. So now it's a time for you.
Thanks very much, Anselmo. Yes, I wanted to just thank everybody for this really rich discussion, and just circling back to what I had mentioned in my brief intervention earlier about the UN's digital consultation, which is going on. I just saw they've extended it through Monday, so that gives us some more time. And I think as we're talking about these very important concrete proposals, it's very important to garner some support for them. And hopefully the SG's report towards the end of this year will also refer to all of these proposals and give us a concrete way forward. So I'm going to just put in the chat once more an outline of, or rather links to these proposals on the online platform. And I really encourage you to have a look at these proposals, vote on them, comment on them. so on and so forth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yasmina. Okay, I see the hands up, the Dr. Sin. So you have an important mission to convince Ban Ki-moon in Korea to sign, to be the first one, you know. Dr. Sin, you asked for floor, right? Okay, unmute, please. Dr. Sin.
Thank you, Anselmo. Yeah, thank you, Anselmo. Mute. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah, as for the global citizenship education, it is a time when international cooperation and solidarity are desperately needed more than ever. But unfortunately, the barriers and the exclusion, not only between countries, but also within each country, are rising. So we have to strengthen citizenship education about solidarity, mutual understanding, and the consideration of a global community. At last, global citizenship education is needed to overcome the distrust and to build trust in global community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sin. I'd like to make two takeaways from this meeting as one of the participants. As you may know, I was convinced long ago about this campaign, but now I'm very happy to have a very concrete idea how to move forward in Korea and Asia and beyond. You know, two things. One is, you know, the topic, the general theme of this Gwangju Democracy Forum is a global democracy, not global, local democracy. This Gwangju Democracy Forum is by the local government, not national government. You know? So I think this type of issue, I think we need to really work very hard from below, you know, how to mobilize people, the local government, the communities, and then the pressure from below to the national government. I think we have to do more, the groundwork, you know. So in that sense, I was extremely happy, you know, when I made a proposal to Andrea, he immediately accepted my proposal. So now there's now connection between the local Gwangju and the all Gwangju partners, and then they can, I'm sure that they will join. And also, as Andreas said, tomorrow we are going to order Gwangju Democracy Agenda 2030. Definitely I'll put this one so that this becomes the integral part of, you know, the action, you know. Okay, so number one. Number two is, you know, SDG, Sustainability Goal, this is now global agenda, but there is no proper monitoring body globally, you know. UN, of course, UN Secretary General produce reports, you know, according to global indicator, but very superficial. So I was thinking, I know there is a campaign in many countries, whether National Assembly play the role of the monitoring, the SDG monitoring at the national level. You know, similar way, can Parliamentary Assembly the task of monitoring SDG globally, you know, something like that. And then it makes sense to people, you know, because government make a decision, who monitor? Of course, we do as a civil society, but as a civil society, we are very limited in terms of resources and so on, you know. So I think these two, globally, SDG monitoring as a main task of Parliamentary Assembly, and locally, we need to mobilize more, you know. So I think these are the concrete takeaway for me, you know. I thank you for this session. I really get some idea, and also I hope to continue, because there's also another the local global forum in Korea, in the Busan. They are talking about global citizen education. Definitely, I want to put this one in the agenda for global citizen education for 7, you know. So this is my contribution as a takeaway from this session. So once again, I want to thank you, all of you, sharing your ideas, and also we have a lot of work to do, you know, academically, politically, practically. So let's continue to build, you know. Okay, so thank you very much. Stay safe and see you again. Next year, you have to come to Gwangju, you know, so we can see something concrete on the ground. Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Okay, Fogos, UN 2020. Yasmina.
Hi, Anselmo. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, John, okay, from India. Okay, you have also played a role in India to spread this news. Okay,
yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.